Welcome. I'm Ron Baker, Director of the Canadian Small Church Ministry Center, and this is us, Small Churches in Action podcast. And today we have the special privilege of having with us a young fellow who just loves to hang out in churches and is currently working as a transitional pastor. Now, I say young because he's younger than me. We both have a history of being in the same place of Kindersley, Saskatchewan. But when you look at his face, as you are already, he's a little older than 16. So we're going to ask him just to introduce himself, and if he can give us just a little bit of background on his ministry journey. And so I'm going to, here's Paul Warnock. There, I introduced him. Take it away, Paul.
Yes, I'm Paul Warnock, and my dad actually used to pastor the church that Ron has pastored in Kindersley, Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
So our roots go back a long, long ways. Yeah, I'm a preacher's kid. I never wanted to be a pastor, and I've been pastoring for over 30 years now. So that tells you something, I guess. I served in two parishes before my current assignment. I was up in the Peace River country for over 10 years. And grew to really love the folk up there. And while I was there, the church went through a huge demographic shift. When I came there, the average age was about 65. When I left, it was under 20. It was quite a thrill to see 2 rows of young people sitting in front of the church every Sunday. And but yeah, it was a huge shift there. We had something like a dozen or 15 different congregations represented in our congregation there. It was pretty much a community church. Very small community, about 200 people in the town, and about maybe 1,500 in 1,000 square miles. So quite isolated. My second parish was East Central Alberta, in the dryland country, where I served in a small community of 3,000 people. It had 7 churches, of which we were one, and it had an aged population which grew older as I was there for 16 years, and all of our young people moved away and didn't come back. So that was a totally different, I guess, experience than the first one.
Yeah,
but
two very different perspectives. Yeah.
Yeah. After that, I was out of ministry for about a year and a half, kind of collecting my wits. And I thought I didn't ever want to do transitional ministry. I thought I want to go someplace and stay there. But this opportunity came up. A good friend of mine suggested I should try it. So here I am, and I'm actually loving it and finding it's a very good fit. I'm serving in a congregation that's about an hour and a half east of Edmonton, and yeah, it's been good. I've been there 10 months so far.
10 months. All right. Well, as I mentioned to you before, I'm actually just starting into an interim sort of transitional ministry type thing. So talking with you today is actually, well, I'll say it's for me, but it's for all the rest of us that listen. So I've got a few questions I'd like to ask you. Yep. as we look at that and talk about some of transitional ministry. Let me start off with the whole question, and particularly for small churches, and you're in a smaller church, what's the advantage of having a transitional ministry versus somebody who just comes in and preaches on Sunday for 30 minutes and they're done, and then they come back a week later or whatever?
So you mean in terms of instead of pulpit supply?
Yeah.
Well, I think there are several advantages to transitional ministry, and I'll just list a few of them. Forgive me if I look at my notes, because I hope to stay on track if I can. But
you're a preacher, so yeah, we're glad that you have notes. Thank you.
I might even stick my notes up a little closer here so I don't have to look down quite as much. But I think one of the big things that, when you have a long-term pastorate, so pastor leaves, in this case, it's been 20 years, and they've had 2 20-year pastorates. When you have a long-term pastor leave, there's actually a pretty big cultural shift that happens. Leaders create an ethos, they create an environment which is particular to them as a leader, and it leaves its imprint on a congregation. So when they leave, it's a difficult time for a congregation, because they're, in a sense, sorting themselves out, trying to figure out just, okay, like, what are we, who are we, how do we function without this person being here who's been with us for so long? and who, as you know from being a pastor, the longer you're there, the more things kind of end up on your plate, right?
Yeah.
So there's that whole thing of the cultural shift, and it just helps the congregation have somebody come in who can help them to evaluate, to assess where they're at, and what needs to happen for them to move forward. So that's one of the big values. Obviously, there's going to be this whole grieving process that has to happen, and
Mm.
I don't think congregations understand that it's a very real thing that happens. You grieve the loss of this pastor, not only because you have personal relationships, but because of all the roles that they filled in your church's life. And you have a shepherd that was known and trusted and loved, and now they've moved on, and it's kind of like, it's not like a death, but
Well, it is sort of, isn't it? Really? I mean,
yeah,
yeah. I don't know how else to describe some of that. Here was someone doing something, being part of,
yeah,
and now they aren't.
yeah,
That seems like death to me, but yeah.
yeah. So that whole thing has to get processed, and
Mm.
just even helping them to grieve well, and to helping the previous pastor to leave well sometimes is part of what you do. Once they've left, you still can help them leave well. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
But and then sometimes there are just issues that have to be dealt with that maybe couldn't be addressed by the outgoing pastor because they were present in the middle of it all.
Hmm.
And maybe there's a variety of reasons why they couldn't deal with stuff like perhaps it needed to be dealt with. So as a transitional pastor, you come in on the front end, everybody knows you've got permission to deal with stuff, to address things that need to be addressed. And that's part of your role, is to help them deal with some stuff that maybe didn't get dealt with like it could have been. So like in my current charge, for example, before I went there, I knew some of the situation that was, needing to be looked at. And one of the issues was just, conflict had been avoided. Like the
Hmm.
previous pastor admitted this freely, and everybody in the church knew it. He didn't like doing conflict, so he didn't. So when I came, there was some conflict issues that had never been resolved. And in the first board meeting, I said, well, we're going to actually address the conflict and deal with it. And it's like this heavy sigh of relief. Like,
Yeah.
oh, good,
Yeah.
we're going to address these things. And so it's no slam on the previous guys, just that wasn't one of his strengths, dealing with conflict. And no one else in the church really had stepped up to help deal with the conflict. It was there, hadn't been addressed. So that's part of it. It's just sometimes things you got to deal with. That's just part of your job. And then I think there's just the very practical matter of just taking care of business.
Yeah.
While the congregation gets ready to make another hire of a longer term pastor. And as a transitional pastor, part of my job is to make sure that the bases get covered. They have, services planned, and I'm a teacher, so I tend to teach series. So I'm in my fourth series since I've been there.
Yeah.
But I'm addressing specific issues that I could see maybe needed to be addressed. And the last one I just finished being a series on marriage, and there's been several divorces in the congregation. So just some biblical instruction about some of those things. So yeah, there's quite a variety of reasons why I think it's good. I haven't exhausted the reasons, but those are some of the ones I've found. And it's just, we're there to serve a congregation, help them to get through a tough period in their church's history, prepare them for a new chapter, and it's a privilege to be able to do that.
Yeah. Now, you talked a little bit about conflict, and I'd love to know how you've been able, first board meeting, you're going to deal with conflict. What type of steps, what type of things have happened in order for the church to deal with some of that conflict that's been there?
Well, that's an interesting question. What kind of conflict do we encounter, and how do we deal with it? Because it does assume that there has been some conflict.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
and that there will be conflict when a pastor leaves. And my experience has been it's not very often a pastor can leave without there have been some kind of conflict that even was unresolved when he left.
Yeah.
So I think that there is conflict, and sometimes it's conflict that actually precipitated a pastor leaving. It's just not possible to please everybody all the time, and sometimes that can build up. And it's been noted that it's usually less than 5% of a congregation that is dissatisfied with a pastor's performance or his ministry. But that 5% can become either vocal enough or agitated enough or whatever, make their discomfort, their displeasure known.
Yeah.
That as a pastor, you say, I've just had enough. And usually it's not a very many people. It's less than 5%. That's what the studies have shown.
Yeah.
So there's conflict there, and what types of conflict are encountered? Well, there's a variety, I think, of things. Sometimes it's just the conflict is it's simply a relational thing. There's some things that just some relationships didn't work very well,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
over time that tension built up to a place where it no longer was sustainable to stay in the place. So that sometimes is one kind of conflict. Sometimes it has to do with ministry objectives and goals. The maybe even style and ability in ministry, and the needs of a congregation might change over time. And maybe the pastor goes, well, I don't do that. So
Yeah.
and like for example, as a congregation ages, if you have a young congregation and say I know one church where the guy was a youth pastor and he came in to be the senior pastor, but he was just great with young people. But as the young people left and there was an older congregation, he didn't quite fit that as well anymore because he had different focus or different ability. So sometimes there's those kinds of things. Ministry needs, ministry objectives can create some tensions that can't be resolved by staying, so you leave. Um, Sometimes, past, like I've already touched on, pastor's gift mix is no longer a good fit for the needs of a congregation.
Yeah.
That might create some conflict. Sometimes pastors just simply get tired, especially if you've been like 20 years and, it's just like I did 16 years without a sabbatical, which looking back, I think was dumb, but you get tired. And when you're tired, you don't always, sometimes you don't recognize your need for extended rest. And that need is still there. And when we're tired, we just don't do our best work. That's
Yeah.
just the simple truth. And sometimes things get neglected. And then that creates some tensions, which people go, well, we need to get some guys a little hotter, faster, fresher blood, and so yeah, quite a few different sources of conflict, I guess you could say, types of things that maybe precipitate a pastor leaving.
Mhm. So a church that finishes off, they've just had their pastor leave, whether with conflict or, as you say, very probably there's always going to be some kind of conflict, whatever it may be, and it may not be that large, but you'll have the transitional pastor comes in and has to deal with that. I think a church at the same time also tends to lose their own confidence as they go through that time of perhaps conflict or whatever it is. How do you help to restore that?
How do you inspire confidence in a church
Yeah.
as they consider their future?
Yeah.
I think the big thing is to establish trust with the leadership team and with the congregation. And trust is one of those things that you don't get a certificate saying trust me. Trust is something you have to earn, and it's only one way to earn it, and that's the old-fashioned way of you work hard and you do it over time. And over time, you will build trust if you're doing, if you're serving well and relating well. But it seems to me that while we have specific tasks as transitional leaders, we can't have an agenda. When we come into a congregation, we're not there to drive our agenda. We're there to actually serve them. And we have certain tasks that, we have to do, but we don't go there with an agenda saying, I have a timeline and I'm going to get this done in this much time. And I don't think that's very helpful. Fairly soon after I began my present charge, I realized that this was not going to be a one-year gig. I signed a one-year contract, but I realized fairly soon that this is probably going to be at least 2 years. And so I had to recalibrate my thinking and realize that, this is going to take longer than we probably thought it would. And usually the longer a previous pastor was there, the longer your transitional
Yeah.
ministry is going to have to be. But change just takes time. So one of the ways I think we establish trust, especially I think in a rural context, which is where I've always served, is simply by being patient. You know, when Paul talks to Timothy about, you know, the farmer has to be patient, you know, waiting for the rains, and you know, like that's very much a rural construct. You have to be patient in a rural setting. You have to allow for time, the time it's going to take to for good change to happen. And one of the kind of the truisms about rural ministry is that rural congregations change very slowly,
Mhm.
but they change again very slowly. So once you get something in place, it doesn't change again really quickly. And in urban congregations, there's much more a higher pace of change happening all the time, where in rural congregations, that's not quite as true. So to understand that, just you have to be patient and let things happen as they will happen in the time it's going to take. Um, I spend a lot of time talking with people, listening to people. I meet every week with our board chair for an hour or two, just not necessarily to talk about ministry stuff, although that does come into it, but mostly to build a relationship, to build a friendship, to get to know each other, because that's how trust will happen. If we know each other well, we trust each other, kind of cover each other's back, all that kind of stuff. So we do that every week. Um, I have an open door policy,
Mhm.
and
As much as we can during COVID. Yeah. Okay.
well, actually, I just have an open door policy,
Okay.
but you know, anybody comes in the church building,
Mhm.
I'm out there to talk to them,
Yeah. Yeah.
and just, you know, working at the relationship thing. And like even like we've been meeting, we've had services ever since I've been there. They started, I think, 2 weeks before I came last July. So we've had every Sunday we've had a service,
Mhm.
and after the service, everybody wants to stand around and talk. So we do that, you know, respecting the, you know, the rules. But that's a big part of what happens in a rural congregation. Is like this sometimes the only time they see each other during the week if they aren't related to each other. And just to spend that time visiting, getting to know each other, enjoying each other's company. And so that's something that's really big. I've made a strong emphasis on that. Just doing that, being there, helps build trust. We also establish trust through faithful ministry. You know, just by doing the basics well, doing the job that a pastor does, doing it consistently. And so I'm a teacher, and that's kind of what I do. And I realized, you know, God made me a teacher for a reason, and He put me where I'm at right now because I'm a teacher. I really think that. And so I'm working hard to have a good teaching ministry. And, you know, that's in, you know, writing Bibles. I actually have a Bible study curriculum that I've written that they wanted to use. So, you know,
Yeah.
revamping that for them, and the whole preaching, teaching thing and all of that. So yeah, I'm finding what I'm finding is that the people in the congregation I serve actually have some pretty good ideas about what they want to do, and what they want
Isn't
to see
that
happen.
that's rather refreshing? Probably one of the most important things we need to recognize, whether we're transitional or not, is, you know, people actually know things,
Yeah.
and yeah, yeah,
Oh yeah.
we're
Yeah.
yeah.
But that's the fourth thing I was going to say about how to inspire confidence is, you know, they know where they'd like to see the church go. They don't necessarily know how to get it there, but they do have some ideas. And so part of my job is I do a lot of permission giving,
Mhm.
and I do a lot of cheerleading. And for example, our ladies, um, you know, the whole ladies ministry is in quite a disarray. So at our last AGM, we elected a new president, and she's got a team around her now of two other people. But the youngest lady of the group, she says, "Well, do you think we could start a walking group where we meet every second week to go walking together as women of our church, and invite community people too? And then we'll come back to the church and pray together afterwards, and go for it." Like, sure, yeah,
Yeah.
you know. And partly that's, you know, sometimes people, especially if you have a long tenured pastor, he tends to, all the buck stop on his desk, and he controls a lot of stuff. And for them to understand, though, it's your church, it's your group, your fellowship, your congregation, whatever, you have the responsibility to make things happen. It's not all up to the pastor. but then give them permission and authority to go with the responsibility. And it's been really interesting just to see people grab onto it and say, wow, we actually get to do stuff.
Mhm.
And I'm excited because, I'm doing less, they're doing more,
Yeah,
but I think it's better for them. So, yeah.
oh, I think so too. I love the church, but the church is the church. It's not the pastor. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's great. Yeah. So if you were to, you said at the beginning, or you have said that you really enjoy this. Why do you enjoy it?
Why?
Yeah.
Well, I like people.
Okay.
Part of it.
Yeah.
I was the chairman of the board said something to me interesting here this last time we met. He said, I'm an introvert.
Uh-huh.
What, really? Because I think I'm an introvert too,
Hmm.
but I love people. So put those two things together. I don't get energized by too much people time. Maybe that's what it is. But no, I mean, I love people. I love the church. Um, Bill Hybels saying about the church is the hope of the world, and I really do believe that's true.
Yeah.
And in rural communities, like the church helps knit together the fabric of a community. And when churches are doing well, communities do well. And so I'm a big believer in rural ministry and rural churches,
Hmm.
and anything we can do to shore them up and encourage them and help them, I'm just, yes, let's do that.
Yeah.
But this transitional ministry thing, like I didn't think I'd like it, but uh, you come into it with a level of, what shall I say? I'm not sure it's really authority, but maybe it's expertise. You're viewed as being
Right.
somebody who knows something, and that is kind of refreshing because I've I've pastored places where, and I've been places where everybody's, if you're a lawyer, you're considered to have expertise. If you're an accountant, you have expertise. If you're a medical doctor, you have expertise. But as a pastor with significant years of training, lots and lots of experience, and lots of upgrading along the way, and lots of reading and self-education, you're never viewed as being an expert on anything because everybody else can trump you with their opinion. So it's kind of fun to come into a situation where they expect that you actually know something that can help them. And then as you work with them, they're very thankful that you're there, and there's a receptivity to what you're doing, and it's kind of fun.
It is kind of, yeah, it is refreshing, isn't it?
Well, it is. It's fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Now, you've just triggered a thought for me, just to sort of dig into some of your past with rural church ministry and working with
mhm.
pastors. Um, I've followed some of that work over the years
Yeah.
with rural church pastors and small churches right now. What do you think is the most important thing that someone who would be looking at coming into a small church, if you were to say you want to pastor a small church, here's what you need to know, here's what you need to think about, here's what would be your thoughts on that? By the way, I do know, you've been part of a rural church pastors network. You've helped initiate a number of rural church initiatives. So you can be an expert. This is your expertise area, Paul. So go
Well,
for
I'm not always sure,
it.
but no, I think okay, it depends on who the person is. Is it somebody from a rural background or somebody from an urban background?
Hmm.
Um, I remember talking to a fellow, this is like years and years ago. Oh man, 1992 or four, I think it was, out at Abbotsford General Assembly. But this fellow, he was a city boy, and his wife was a city girl, and they went and they did a church plant in a small rural community.
Hmm.
And at that time, I was in my first charge, which was a very small community. And I got talking with him, and he said, man, he says, I did not have any idea that rural was so different from urban.
Mhm.
And rural, there's a rural culture, which you don't just pop in and do what you do. You have to understand the culture of the place where you're going to serve. And different rural places do have some variances, but generally there's a rural way of thinking about life and doing life which is significantly different from how people do things in the city. And if you don't understand that cultural thing, it might be some tough going for you for a while because you're going to be sometimes going against the grain or against the current. That'd be a big one.
Yeah. What would you say if you could talk about a rural culture that may be different than some of what happens in a city? What would be your first sort of thought on that? Oh, he's pulling out a book. I can see he's, yeah.
Well, I got a whole stack of these things that we
Oh, all
developed.
right.
But I'll just there's one here. I'm just gonna understanding. I think this is the one. Understanding diversity in rural churches and communities and ministry mindsets. But just give you some examples, okay, of the difference between urban and rural in terms of ministry in a church. So, in terms of church structure, rural churches are family based, not cell based. In our big city churches, where there's been a move to the cell-based kind of small group, all that kind of ministry kind of method. But in churches, you're a small rural church, you're a small group already.
Yeah.
But it's family based, and so like in the current situation where I am, there's Range Road 123 east of the town where we're at, and there are two sets of families living there. There's one family with a parent and three children all living down that road, and then across the highway south of there on the same range road there's three siblings who are now in their 60s that all live down that same road. And then in between is another lady that they're all they take great care of her. She's a 90-year-old lady living on her own on a farm. But that's one part of the church. And then there's another part of the congregation west of town which they're all family, but there's these family groups, and then there's intermarriage between them. So then that creates some issues. But it's a totally different thing than get in a big city church of 700 or 800 people. There's no families that kind of have much leverage or control in the church usually. I mean, there's enough people offsetting that it doesn't happen. But in a rural church, you have families that they can have quite a degree of control over how things happen. You've got to understand that. Or what's the values base? Well, in an urban church, my observation anyways, is the high value is placed on what is going to be good for the organization to help it achieve its goals. But in a rural setting, high value is placed on relationships, and relationships trump purposes and goals and even vision. And if the relationships aren't necessarily contributing, even if they don't contribute to the well-being of the organization, you still maintain those relationships because we have to live with these people.
Right? Yeah.
And so it's often the benefit to the stakeholders. It's not the benefit to the organization that kind of creates the value system in a rural congregation. And I mean, I could go down the list. There's all kinds of things, but
well, you're
decision making, for example.
Yes.
Decision making in a rural church, you have to establish consensus. You can't with your position say this is how it's going to be, because if you do that, there will be pushback. So you have to establish consensus, and the expectation is that everybody involved in this gets to have some say. That'll drive you nuts if you are expecting to have positional authority where you can just make your decision and everybody falls into line.
Yeah.
Anyways, yes.
Oh, there's so much we could do here. And basically, I hate to say this, but we've sort of come to about as much time as I usually do in a podcast. And so I think we're going to close down, but maybe there's another 400 or 500 questions I could ask you at a later point. We'll just wait and see how that goes. But thank you very much, Paul. This has been very informative, very helpful for me, and I'm sure for those that'll be watching as well. So just want to say thank you.
Well, thanks, Ron. I'm glad for the opportunity, and I was going to just
if you have anything you want to promote,
PR here. So if you're interested in rural ministry, can you see that? Okay, there you go.
Yeah, we can see that.
So this is the book written by Tim Beadle, my good friend. Who was the district coach in our denomination for 15 years, and he got enthused about rural ministry, although he's a Idiot.
Yes, I love that term.
But he did a doctoral dissertation on rural ministry, and this book is the product of that.
Yeah.
And has a lot of very, very good insights about what it means to do ministry in a rural setting. So
Yeah.
if you want to buy it, you can go to amazon.com, and or if you write me a personal letter, I will send you a free copy.
Will you?
I will.
Okay. All
have
the
a
people
box-
have to figure out
I
is
have
how
a-
to get a hold of you.
Well, I'm not going to tell you. No,
I know you aren't. But
I have a box full of copies that I kind of got through our rural church pastors network. They paid for
Yeah.
them, so I don't have to pay for them. But yeah, send me $10 for the postage, because
okay.
it's expensive to mail a book these days.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if you would like to read this book, if you're serious about rural ministry, I'd love to send you a copy. Anything we can do to encourage guys to serve in the rural church, because
Yep.
in the days ahead, we're going to be short of people that really feel called to that ministry, but it's a
Yeah.
very valuable call.
Yeah. I agree with you.
So, yeah,
Okay.
I'll tell you well,
That's all right. What we'll do is they can contact the
You.
Canadian Small Church Ministry Center, and
yeah,
we'll let them know how to get a hold of you.
yeah, because I work with Ron, so
Yeah.
both Rons.
Yeah. Both Rons. Yeah. Yeah. It's great fun.
That's very
All right.
ironic.
Okay. Okay. I'll just iron past that one, and yeah. Okay. Yeah. We'll leave it at that, Paul.
It's got the ick factor.
Okay. We're quitting now, Paul.
Okay, take care. See ya.
All right. Thanks, Paul.
Good talking to you, Ron.
Right. Bye.
God bless.